Hello, and welcome to your daily English dose. I'm your host.
And I'm our expert for today.
And welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a really fascinating journey through the history of the USA.
That's right, from the earliest inhabitants, well, right up to the modern day.
You've given us some rich material, and our mission really is to highlight the most important events and ideas. We want to make sure you grasp the why behind the what's in America's story.
Absolutely. And what's truly fascinating here, if we connect this to the bigger picture, is how America's history isn't just, a list of dates.
Yeah.
It's more like a constant exploration, sometimes a real struggle with its founding ideals like freedom, equality,
Yeah, those big ideas.
and how those ideals bump up against the often difficult realities it has faced. We'll definitely explore this American paradox as we go along.
Okay, so let's start way back. Imagine a vast land, mountains, forests, lakes, teeming with animals, fish. This was America maybe 16,000 years ago, long before Europeans.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is that the first people, the ancestors of Native Americans, they arrived from Asia across the Bering Strait.
Right, the land bridge theory.
Yeah. And they didn't just arrive, they formed incredibly diverse cultures. You had settled farmers like the Hopi in Arizona and New Mexico.
Complex societies.
Very. Or think about the powerful Iroquois Confederacy up in New York State. Really sophisticated political structures.
And then further south, Central and South America, you see these, well, advanced civilizations like the Maya, Aztecs, Inca.
Absolutely stunning achievements. They had thousands of different languages, cultures. It was incredibly diverse.
So different from what came later.
And this raises an important point. Their worldviews, especially about land, were fundamentally different from the Europeans.
Oh, so.
Well, Native Americans often saw land as something communal, something sacred, with spiritual meaning, not really something an individual could own privately.
Right, more about stewardship.
Precisely. And this difference, this clash in perspective over property, it would lead to, well, serious conflict later on, almost inevitably.
Okay, let's unpack the European arrival then. Many people know Christopher Columbus, 1492.
The famous date, yeah.
He thought he'd reached India, called the people Indians, but actually even before him.
The Vikings.
Right. The Vikings probably reached Canada maybe around 81,000, way earlier.
Indeed. But Columbus's journey, that really began the age of discovery for Europeans. And soon, you had the big powers coming over.
Spain, France.
Spain, France, the Dutch, Britain. Spain was after gold, empire. France, mostly the fur trade. The Dutch were focused on trade routes and posts.
And the British.
The British, they were looking more towards permanent settlements, especially along the Atlantic coast.
Which led to the 13 colonies, and interestingly, two very different groups of English people crossing the Atlantic almost at the same time.
Yes, this is crucial.
First, you have Jamestown, Virginia, founded 1607. It was really all about finding gold, getting rich.
A very commercial venture.
Life was incredibly hard there initially, but tobacco, that kind of saved them economically.
It did, but here's the dark side. To make tobacco profitable, they started bringing slaves from Africa to work the fields. That started as early as 1619.
Okay, so that's Jamestown.
Now, contrast that. Here's where it gets really interesting, the core of that American paradox we mentioned.
Okay.
Just a few years later, 1620, the Pilgrim Fathers arrive in Plymouth, Massachusetts.
Completely different motivation.
Totally different. They were seeking religious freedom, escaping the Church of England. They had this idea, this belief, that all people were equal in the eyes of God. And importantly, they didn't initially establish slavery.
And they famously got help surviving that first winter, right?
Yes, from a Native American man named Squanto. He actually spoke some English and taught them how to hunt, how to grow corn.
Which led to the first Thanksgiving in 1621.
That's the tradition, yes. So what does this all mean? Right at the very beginning of English settlement in America, you see these two powerful, conflicting ideals taking root.
Freedom and equality in the North.
Well, the pursuit of religious freedom and a kind of communal equality in the North, yes, alongside the establishment of chattel slavery for economic gain in the South.
So freedom and bondage side by side.
Exactly. And this tension, this fundamental conflict, is absolutely crucial to understanding everything that follows in U.S. history.
Okay, moving forward. More and more British people come over, settling the East Coast. By 1770, you've got 13 distinct colonies.
All technically governed by Britain, yeah. But Britain was, far away across the Atlantic.
And then comes a war that changes things.
Right, the French and Indian War from 1754 to 1763. Britain wins. But what's fascinating here is the consequence. Britain is left with massive debt.
And they need to pay for it.
Precisely. So Parliament starts imposing new taxes directly on the colonies. Things like the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act.
And the big one, the Tea Act of 1773.
Yes, and this made the colonists furious, not just about the money
It
necessarily.
was the principle, right? Their
Yeah,
slogan was, no taxation without representation.
exactly. If they didn't have their own representatives sitting in the British Parliament, they argued, Parliament had no right to tax them directly.
Which leads us to a famous incident.
The Boston Tea Party, December 1773.
Sure.
Colonists, some disguised as Native Americans, dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor.
A dramatic protest against the tax.
A very dramatic protest. And this raises an important question. Was it just about money or something deeper?
Seems deeper.
I think so. This event, and more importantly, Britain's really harsh response to it closing the port, restricting rights that pushed the colonies closer together, it fueled a desire for self-governance.
Things escalate quickly then.
They do. April 1775, fighting breaks out at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. The war had begun.
And they needed a leader for their army.
George Washington, a wealthy farmer, a planter from Virginia, with military experience from the French and Indian War, he becomes the commander-in-chief of the American Army.
There's that story about him, the cherry tree, I cannot tell a lie. Meant to show his honesty, right?
That's a famous piece of folklore, yes, emphasizing his character. But his real strength was holding the army together through incredibly difficult times.
And then comes the defining document.
This is where we see those ideals really take shape. July 4th, 1776, Thomas Jefferson drafts the Declaration of Independence.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A truly radical statement for its time.
A blueprint for a new kind of nation.
Absolutely, though of course the reality of who all men included was limited at the time.
Right. The war continues, it's tough going, but the Americans get help.
Crucial help from France. Money, troops, naval support, that was decisive. They finally win the war at Yorktown in October 1781. 2 years later, the treaty is signed. They're officially free.
Independence achieved, but now they have to build a nation.
So what does this all mean? It means they need a government. In 1787, delegates meet and write the U.S. Constitution.
Creating a republic.
A modern republic, yes, with a revolutionary structure. 3 separate but equal branches of government. Congress makes the laws, the president executes them, and the Supreme Court interprets them. Checks and balances.
And Washington becomes the first president.
George Washington, inaugurated in 1789. This wasn't just about breaking away from Britain. He was this grand political experiment, trying to create a large-scale government based on, theoretically, universal human rights. A truly revolutionary idea.
So independence is won, the government is set up. What happens next?
Westward expansion. After independence, the USA begins to grow, pushing its borders west across the continent.
And there was an idea driving this, wasn't there?
Yes, this powerful belief called manifest destiny. The idea that Americans were, well, almost divinely chosen, destined to spread their democratic institutions and way of life from the Atlantic to the Pacific.
Sounds ambitious.
He was incredibly ambitious. But this raises an important question, or rather, highlights a darker side. While manifest destiny certainly fueled national unity and incredible expansion,
There was a cost.
a huge cost. It also served as the justification for taking land from Native Americans, often forcibly, and from Mexico. The consequences are often tragic.
Let's look at some key moments in that expansion. Jefferson plays a role again.
Yes, Thomas Jefferson is the 3rd president. In 1803, he oversees the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon's France.
How much did that cost?
Only $15 million, an incredible bargain. It was a vast territory, 5 times the size of France itself. It basically doubled the size of the USA overnight.
Wow, and then they needed to explore it.
Right. So in 1804, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark set off on their famous expedition.
And they had help from a Native American woman.
Yes, Sacagawea, a young Shoshone woman. Her knowledge of the terrain, her language skills, they were invaluable. They journeyed all the way to the Pacific Ocean and back.
Incredible journey. And the expansion continued.
Oh, yes. The USA bought Florida from Spain in 1819, and then came the conflict with Mexico.
The Mexican-American War.
1846 to 1848. As a result, the U.S. gained Texas, California, and a huge swath of the Southwest. By 1848, the USA stretched from coast to coast. Manifest destiny, realized geographically.
But you mentioned the darker side.
We have to acknowledge it. The Trail of Tears in the 1830s, for example. Thousands of Native Americans, like the Cherokee, were forcibly marched west from their ancestral homelands in the Southeast. Many died. It's a brutal chapter.
And then gold was discovered.
Right, the California Gold Rush, starting in 1848-49, this brought a massive influx of people from all over the world, dramatically speeding up the settlement and development of the West.
But that also caused problems.
Absolutely. Increased conflict with Native Americans, huge environmental damage, progress, but at a significant cost.
So the country's growing rapidly, reaching, 31 million people by the mid-19th century?
Yeah, incredible growth. But underneath that growth, these serious, deep divisions were festering, especially between the North and the South.
And the expansion itself made it worse.
Ironically, yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, every time the U.S. acquired new territory, the explosive question came up. Would slavery be allowed there?
Ah, so expansion forced the issue.
Exactly. It became this constant political battle. The North was becoming more industrial, based on factories and free labor, and generally opposed to the spread of slavery, if not always its existence.
While the South.
The South remained largely agricultural, dominated by large cotton and tobacco plantations. Its entire economy, its social structure, was built on the backs of enslaved African Americans. They were desperate to protect and expand slavery.
Two fundamentally different ways of life.
Two very different societies, with different values, different economic interests, and literature played a role too. The novel Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe.
Published in 1852.
Yes, it became a massive bestseller in the North. It vividly portrayed the harsh realities and cruelty of slavery, and it really galvanized anti-slavery sentiment, made it a moral issue for many.
So the tension is just building and building.
To a breaking point. And that point came in 1860 with the election of Abraham Lincoln as president.
He was against the expansion of slavery.
Correct. His platform wasn't necessarily to abolish slavery where it already existed, but firmly against allowing it into new territories. For the South, that was unacceptable.
So they left the Union.
South Carolina seceded first, very quickly after Lincoln's election. 10 other Southern states followed, forming the Confederate States of America.
And that meant war.
The fighting began in April 1861, when Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The Civil War had begun.
A terrible conflict.
Absolutely devastating. Brother fought against brother. Over 600,000 soldiers died, more than in almost all other American wars combined.
What were the advantages on each side?
Well, the North, the Union, had a much larger population, more factories, more railroads, huge industrial advantages. The South, the Confederacy, had a strong military tradition and brilliant generals like Robert E. Lee.
And Lincoln takes a decisive step during the war.
A monumental step. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation.
What exactly did it do?
It declared that all slaves in the states currently in rebellion against the Union were legally free. It didn't free slaves in the border states loyal to the Union, but it fundamentally changed the war's purpose.
How so?
It wasn't just about preserving the Union anymore. It was now explicitly also a war to end slavery. It added this powerful moral dimension.
And Lincoln gave a famous speech around that time.
Yes, also in 1863, after the pivotal Battle of Gettysburg. His Gettysburg Address is incredibly famous, very short, but profound. He spoke about the nation being conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
Government of the people, by the people, for the people.
Shall not perish from the earth. He essentially redefined the nation's purpose in the midst of this horrific conflict, linking the war effort back to those founding ideals.
The North eventually wins.
Yes, in April 1865, General Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The war was over, and slavery was officially abolished everywhere in the U.S. by the 13th Amendment later that year.
But tragedy strikes right after.
Just 5 days after Lee's surrender, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated while attending a play. A terrible loss for the nation at a critical moment.
So what does this all mean? The war is over, slavery is abolished. What comes next?
The period after the war is called Reconstruction. The goal was, essentially, to rebuild the South, physically and politically, and crucially, to integrate the newly freed black population into American society as citizens.
Sounds like a difficult task.
Extremely difficult.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating, in a tragic way, is how much resistance there was. Many white Southerners were deeply resentful about losing the war and the end of their way of life.
And this led to violence?
Yes. Organizations like the Ku Klux Klan emerged, using terror and violence to intimidate black people and white Republicans trying to enforce new rights.
But black men got the right to vote.
Technically, yes, with the 15th Amendment in 1870. But in reality, through violence, intimidation, and later discriminatory laws like poll taxes and literacy tests, black men were systematically prevented from voting in large parts of the South.
And then came segregation laws.
Right. As Reconstruction eventually ended, Southern states implemented Jim Crow laws. These mandated strict racial segregation in almost all aspects of public life: schools, hospitals, transportation, restaurants, even cemeteries.
Separate but equal was the justification, right?
That was the legal fiction, yes. But the reality was always separate and profoundly unequal. So this raises an important question. The Civil War ended slavery and saved the Union, yes. But Reconstruction, it ultimately failed to secure true equality.
Leaving a long legacy.
A very long and painful legacy of racial inequality and division that would continue to challenge America for generations. The struggle for civil rights was far from over.
Okay, so after the turmoil of the Civil War and Reconstruction, what's the next big phase?
Industrialization on a massive scale. After the war, America transforms rapidly into a major industrial power.
The Transcontinental Railway opens in 1869.
Right. Connecting the country like never before. Factories spring up. Cities grow incredibly fast.
Sounds like progress.
It was progress in many ways. But what's fascinating here is that Mark Twain called this period the Gilded Age.
Gilded, meaning?
Meaning it looked shiny and prosperous on the surface, like gold plating. But underneath, there was a lot of, well, political corruption, shady business deals, and huge differences between the super rich and the very poor.
You had figures like Carnegie and Rockefeller.
Right, the so-called robber barons or captains of industry, depending on your perspective. Andrew Carnegie in steel, John D. Rockefeller in oil. They built enormous fortunes and powerful monopolies, controlling entire industries.
But life for the average worker.
Often very harsh. Long hours, dangerous conditions, low pay, terrible living conditions in crowded city tenements. A stark contrast.
So what does this all mean? Did people just accept this?
No, not at all. These problems sparked a reaction, a reform movement known as the Progressive Era, starting in the late 19th century and running into the early 20th.
What were they trying to achieve?
They wanted to use the government to fix society's problems, to curb the power of big business, reduce corruption, improve conditions for workers and the poor.
And journalists played a role.
A big role. They were called muckrakers writers, who exposed the corruption and the social ills in newspapers and magazines. People like Ida Tarbell taking on Standard Oil.
And presidents got involved too.
Yes, this was a big shift. Presidents like Theodore Roosevelt, he became known as the trust buster for taking on monopolies. Woodrow Wilson later created the Federal Reserve System in 1913 to stabilize banking.
So the government is becoming much more active.
Much more active, taking on this role of protecting the public interest, regulating the economy in ways it hadn't before.
And there were other important changes during this era, amendments to the Constitution.
Absolutely. 1913 was a big year. The 16th Amendment allowed the federal government to collect income tax, providing a new source of revenue.
And the 17th?
The 17th Amendment allowed for the direct election of senators by the people instead of state legislatures choosing them. Made the system more democratic.
A move towards more power for the people.
Yes, and maybe the most significant expansion of democracy in this era came in 1920.
Women's suffrage.
Exactly. The 19th Amendment finally gave women the right to vote nationwide after decades of struggle. A huge victory.
But it wasn't all progress. You mentioned prohibition.
Right. The 18th Amendment, banning the manufacture and sale of alcohol, also came out of this era. It was well-intentioned by some reformers, but it led to a whole host of new problems like organized crime. So a very complex period of reform and reaction.
Now, America starts getting involved more globally. World War I breaks out in Europe in 1914.
Yeah, and the U.S. tries to stay neutral initially. President Wilson wanted to keep America out of it.
That didn't last.
No. Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking ships, including American ones, and other factors, eventually pulled the U.S. into the war in April 1917.
And America's entry made a difference.
A huge difference. American troops and resources helped tip the balance, leading to an Allied victory in 1918. And the war really transformed America's position in the world.
Oh, so.
It emerged as a major global power, economically dominant, actually the biggest creditor nation. A massive shift.
And then came the Roaring Twenties.
Ah, yes, the Roaring Twenties, also called the Jazz Age. After the war, it was a time of, well, huge economic growth, at least for some.
Cars become common.
Mass production, especially Henry Ford's assembly line, made cars affordable. Radios, refrigerators, new consumer goods were everywhere. Hollywood movies, jazz music. It was a time of great cultural change and excitement.
But you said at least for some, there was a downside.
Definitely. Here's where it gets really interesting again. Prosperity wasn't shared equally. Farmers struggled. And the Prohibition era, banning alcohol.
Led to gangsters like Al Capone.
Exactly. Organized crime flourished selling illegal booze. And there was also a dark undercurrent of prejudice.
Against immigrants.
Yes, a real backlash against immigrants, particularly from Southern and Eastern Europe. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan saw a resurgence, targeting not just Black Americans, but also Catholics, Jews, and immigrants. So prosperity and prejudice side by side.
And all that economic boom eventually ended. Dramatically.
Very dramatically. October 1929, the Wall Street stock market crash. Black Tuesday.
The start of the Great Depression.
The start of the worst economic crisis in American history. Banks failed, businesses closed, unemployment soared. Millions lost their jobs, their savings, their homes. People were desperate.
Shanty towns called Hoovervilles popped up.
Yes, named ironically after President Hoover,
Yep.
who many blamed for not doing enough. The old idea that government should just stay out of the economy, well, clearly wasn't working.
So a change in leadership was needed.
And it came in 1932 with the election of Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR. He promised Americans a New Deal.
What was the New Deal?
It was a whole series of bold experimental government programs designed to provide relief, recovery, and reform.
Like creating jobs.
Exactly. Massive public works programs, building dams, bridges, roads, parks programs like the WPA and CCC put millions back to work.
And regulating industries.
Yes, regulating banks and the stock market to prevent another crash. And maybe, most importantly, creating a social safety net.
Social Security.
Social Security, established in 1935, provided pensions for the elderly, unemployment insurance, aid for dependent children. A fundamental shift.
So what does this all mean? The New Deal's legacy.
It fundamentally changed American capitalism. It established the idea, really embedded it, that the federal government had a responsibility to ensure a basic level of economic stability and social welfare for its citizens. A huge transformation in the role of government.
But then global conflict erupts again. World War II in Europe, 1939.
Yes. And again, America initially tries to stay neutral, though FDR clearly favored the Allies.
What changed that?
Pearl Harbor. The surprise attack by Japan on the U.S. naval base in Hawaii, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, as FDR said. America declared war the next day.
And America's contribution was massive.
Immense. America's industrial power became the arsenal of democracy, churning out incredible amounts of planes, tanks, ships, supplies for the Allied effort.
And American troops fought everywhere.
All over the globe, leading the D-Day landings in Normandy to liberate France, fighting brutal island campaigns against Japan in the Pacific.
And the war ended with a new, terrifying weapon.
Yes. In August 1945, the USA dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered shortly after, ending World War II.
A decisive end, but a controversial one.
Absolutely. Still debated today. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, World War II cemented America's position. It emerged from the war as, really, the global superpower, alongside only the Soviet Union. Its economy was booming, its military unmatched. It set the stage for a whole new era of international leadership and rivalry.
Which leads directly into the Cold War.
Exactly. Almost immediately after World War II ended, this deep ideological and geopolitical rivalry developed between the democratic, capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union.
Not a direct war, but a cold one.
Right. A global conflict fought through propaganda, espionage, arms races, economic competition, and crucially, proxy wars conflicts in other countries where the U.S. and USSR backed opposing sides.
And the U.S. had a specific strategy.
What's fascinating here is the adoption of the containment policy around 1947, often associated with the Truman Doctrine. The basic idea was to stop the spread of communism wherever it threatened to expand.
How did they try to do that?
Through various means. Economically, with things like the Marshall Plan, providing massive aid to rebuild war-torn Western Europe and prevent communist takeovers. Militarily, by forming alliances like NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, for collective defense.
And this led to actual conflicts.
Yes, proxy wars like the Korean War in the early 1950s, and incredibly tense moments like the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, where the U.S. and Soviet Union came terrifyingly close to nuclear war. The whole world held its breath.
So America is fighting for freedom globally. But what about at home?
Ah, yes. This raises that crucial question again, that paradox. While America was positioning itself as the leader of the free world against communism.
Back home, things weren't free for everyone.
Exactly. In the southern states, especially, Jim Crow laws were still firmly in place, enforcing legal racial segregation. Black Americans were denied basic rights, treated as second-class citizens.
How could America justify that?
It couldn't, really. This glaring hypocrisy became a major liability, especially during the Cold War propaganda battles. And, more importantly, it spurred Black Americans and their allies to demand change, leading to the modern civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s.
What were some key moments?
There were many. The Supreme Court's Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954 was huge, ruling that separate schools for black and white children were inherently unequal, unconstitutional.
And Rosa Parks.
1955, Rosa Parks refuses to give up her bus seat to a white man in Montgomery, Alabama. Her courageous act sparks the Montgomery bus boycott, a massive, successful, nonviolent protest.
And Martin Luther King Jr. emerges as a leader?
Yes. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a young Baptist minister, became the most prominent voice of the movement, advocating for nonviolent, direct action marches, sit-ins, boycotts.
His I Have a Dream speech.
Delivered during the March on Washington in 1963, it became one of the most powerful and iconic speeches in American history, a call for racial justice and equality.
So, what does this all mean? Did the movement succeed?
It achieved monumental victories.
Yeah.
This national movement, combining grassroots activism with legal challenges, plus the pressure from the Cold War context, led to landmark federal legislation.
The Civil Rights Act.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, and ended legal segregation in public places. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which aimed to overcome legal barriers preventing African Americans from exercising their right to vote.
A second revolution, some call it.
It really was, in many ways, a fundamental step towards fulfilling America's promise. Though, of course, the struggle for true economic equality and against ingrained prejudice continued and continues today.
But at the same time, all this is happening domestically. America gets involved in another major conflict.
Yes, the Vietnam War. Deeply connected to the Cold War containment strategy.
Right.
America got progressively more involved, sending advisors, then combat troops, trying to prevent communist North Vietnam from taking over South Vietnam.
It became a very difficult war.
Incredibly difficult. A long, brutal guerrilla war fought in jungles and villages. And significantly, it was the first war extensively covered by television.
People saw the fighting in their living rooms.
Exactly. Images of the violence, the casualties, the seeming lack of progress. It fueled a massive anti-war movement back home, especially among young people on college campuses. The Tet Offensive in 1968, a major communist assault, particularly shocked Americans and turned many against the war.
How did it end?
The U.S. eventually signed a peace agreement and withdrew its combat troops in 1973. 2 years later, in 1975, North Vietnam conquered South Vietnam, unifying the country under communist rule. It was effectively America's first major war loss.
What was the impact of Vietnam?
What's fascinating here is how deeply it divided American society. It created lasting divisions, distrust of government, and a kind of Vietnam syndrome, a reluctance to commit U.S. forces abroad. It really challenged America's sense of power and its moral authority.
Okay, let's move towards the end of the 20th century. The Cold War eventually ends.
Quite dramatically. The fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989 became this incredibly powerful symbol.
And then the Soviet Union itself collapses.
Yes, in December 1991. Just like that, the Cold War was over. America was left as the world's sole superpower.
A new world order.
That was the phrase President George H.W. Bush used. The idea was that America would now lead a more cooperative, peaceful world, perhaps enforced by international consensus and American power. The swift victory in the Gulf War in 1991, pushing Saddam Hussein's Iraqi forces out of Kuwait, seemed like an early example of this.
And the 1990s saw economic growth.
Yes, generally a period of prosperity, partly driven by the rise of personal computers, the internet, the whole information technology boom.
But that sense of optimism, that security, it didn't last.
No. It was shattered on September 11, 2001. Terrorists hijacking airplanes and crashing them into the World Trade Center towers in New York City and the Pentagon near Washington, D.C. Another plane crashed in Pennsylvania. Nearly 3,000 people were killed.
A profound shock.
Absolutely. This raises an important question. How does a superpower respond to this kind of non-state attack? 9/11 fundamentally changed America's sense of vulnerability and its foreign policy priorities. President George W. Bush declared a global war on terror.
Which led to military action.
Yes. The U.S. quickly invaded Afghanistan later in 2001, targeting al-Qaeda, the group responsible for the attacks, and the Taliban regime that sheltered them.
And then Iraq.
In 2003, the U.S. led an invasion of Iraq based on intelligence later proved faulty that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction and had ties to terrorist groups.
These wars became long and costly.
Very long, very costly, both in lives and resources. So what does this all mean? These wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, along with new domestic security measures like the USA Patriot Act, which expanded government surveillance powers,
Sparked debates.
huge debates about national security versus civil liberties, about America's role in the world, about the effectiveness and consequences of military intervention. And America continues to grapple with these complex global challenges, the rise of China, climate change, international terrorism, alongside ongoing domestic issues like political polarization, economic inequality, and racial justice. The experiment continues.
Wow. This deep dive has really shown, hasn't it, that America's history is this constant, often difficult story of trying to live up to its own founding ideals.
Absolutely. From that initial inherent paradox of freedom and slavery, through the dramatic expansion, the terrible Civil War, the vital struggle for civil rights,
To becoming a global power, facing new kinds of threats.
it's a nation that has been constantly redefining itself, constantly wrestling with its own principles and its own complex reality. It's not a finished story.
It's clear that American history isn't just something in a textbook. It's a living, ongoing conversation.
Precisely. A conversation about what it means to be American, what those ideals truly entail in practice.
So here's a thought for you, our listeners, to maybe reflect on. The U.S. Constitution starts with those famous words, "We the people." But as we've really explored today, the answer to who is included in the people has changed dramatically and often contentiously throughout American history.
It's been a site of constant struggle.
So thinking about this ongoing American experiment, what steps do you think any nation needs to take to truly achieve its founding ideals, whatever they may be? How do you bridge that gap between aspiration and reality? Something to ponder.
A powerful question indeed.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into American history here on your daily English dose. We really hope you enjoyed learning these fascinating facts and gained a deeper understanding. Keep practicing your English with us every day.
Absolutely.
Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.